in Blue-Red Delver, a matchup that is pretty good for Reanimator.
Well, this is the type of matchup where the combo deck has gotten better because of Treasure Cruise. If Myles was playing, say, Teamer Delver instead of this deck, and he had some Spell Pierces instead of Treasure Cruises, Joe might be behind, or he might be on some of the old Sultai shells that had Deathrite Shaman, which is really problematic for Reanimator as well. This build that has, forked bolts and very few counter spells, Reanimator is a lot better here than it would be against the older iterations of Delver.
And these main deck copies of Pyroblast, for example, not exactly great in this matchup. There are some targets, of course, but it's not great here.
You'd be better served with Spell Pierce.
Yes.
Pyroblast is not bad, but you could do better.
Here is a Careful Study, a card that Pyroblast could counter, but no mana in play here for Housman just yet. So 2 cards coming here for Lossett. Number 1 on our Season 1 leaderboard here for 2015 is Joe, at least for right now, due to his win last weekend in Columbus. Sphinx of the Steel Wind and Elish Norn Grand Cenobite are in the graveyard, and if Myles didn't know what he was up to before, he does now.
Yep. And now there are just not that many cards in Myles' deck that matter, assuming Joe has the draw. It's Daze and Force of Will. And Daze may not even matter depending on exactly what's going on in Joe's hand.
Now, what they do now, if you're playing Reanimator, what you do is you force your opponent here in Blue-Red Delver to have counter spells. Burn spells, creatures, card drawing spells, those generally don't matter at this point. Monstrous Swift Spear, while it is a good card, will attack for 1 and put Lossett down to 18. Joe doesn't care about that card. He wants to get one of those big creatures in play, and if he does, the game is likely over. Brainstorm the draw, and you see he has not 1, but 2 copies of Reanimate. He's going to try to cast one right now. Housman going to look at his hand, and he does have a Daze for that, fortunately for him. Doesn't look like Lossett has a second land.
And now, does Joe want to pick a fight? I would. Get that thing into play.
I would too. Here's a Force of Will, removing a Careful Study. And now it's on Myles to have a Force of Will of his own. He does not, and all of a sudden, a Sphinx of the Steel Wind has shown up to the party. And I don't like to call it game over before it is, but it's basically over now.
I was going to say Elish Norn is a lock, but then, I thought about it for a moment, and Sphinx of the Steel Wind is also a lock. So pick your own lock.
Yeah.
They're all locks.
Let your opponent choose which way they want to go. And Housman says, I don't need to play any more turns in this game, and that is going to do it right there. Joe Lossett does win game number 1 here with Reanimator over Blue-Red Delver, and Myles knows he's beat at that point.
Exactly, and that's, that was a perfect crystallization of the challenges that these Blue-Red Delver decks have against combo. There's a Fort Bolt in Myles' hand. Back in the day, that would have been a Spell Pierce. He could have said go on turn 1 instead of playing a creature, and then actually won the fight over the reanimation spell. Instead, he had a shock in his hand and died.
Take a look at the sideboard here for Housman. You're going to find a Dismember, a Pyroblast, a Blue Elemental Blast, a copy of Smash Smithereens, 2 Grafdigger's Cage, 2 Sulfuric Vortex, 4 copies of Cabal Therapy, a Surgical Extraction, a Spell Pierce, and Electrickery. Thankfully for Myles, he does have some pretty useful cards here.
This is a great sideboard here for the Reanimator matchup. You get Spell Pierce and you get Pyroblast, which are slight upgrades, but the real power comes from the 4 copies of Cabal Therapy, the Surgical Extraction, and 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage. A lot of really valuable anti-graveyard cards here, and some good hand disruption here. Try to keep Joe off either a reanimate spell or his way of getting something in the graveyard.
What do we see on Lossett's side?
A Tropical Island, 2 copies of Bayou, 3 Abrupt Decays, an Echoing Truth, 4 Thoughtseize, 2 Pithing Needles, a Coffin Purge, and a Massacre. Really the only thing that stands out here to me are the 3 copies of Abrupt Decay, as it can, blunt a lot of Myles' early pressure.
What's interesting here about Joe's selection is, he's decided to play Reanimator a little bit more moving forward, is because he just feels that his matchup against Blue-Red Delver with Miracles is not very good. And so right now, if you're Joe, you're saying, man, if I was playing Miracles, well, first of all, we'd be in for a pretty long game number 1, most likely. But I'm pretty glad I'm playing Reanimator. It's a good matchup here against Blue-Red Delver.
Yes, certainly better than the Miracles matchup. And that used to be the major incentive to play Miracles in my mind, or at least one of them was your matchup against Delver was really powerful. But now with Treasure Cruise, these Delver decks can hang around even if the game goes long. And that combined with sometimes you just lose to the early tempo, creatures plus Daze draws, means I think Miracles is now south of 50% against Delver, and that was not the case pre-Treasure Cruise.
And perhaps that's why we have seen the change here from Lossett. Blue-Red Delver is very, very popular. So Joe electing to go with Reanimator, at least for this particular tournament. Game number 2 will be underway here in just a moment. While we do wait, we will talk about Star City Games game night. Used to be every Wednesday. Now it's every week. And in January, we got Mammoth tokens.
Yep, you can see the kit in front of you. We release a new kit that involves several pins and a bunch of foil tokens each week for you to give out your store. It is too late, obviously, to get a sign up for January at this point, but if you want to get a sign up for February, head over starcitygames.com/game night, get your store set up. As Cedric said, used to be Wednesday night, now run it any night that you want to, sanctioned, unsanctioned. Just get your players in your store for some fun and friendly Magic, whichever the day of the week you feel is best.
StarCityGames.com/game night for more information. February kit will be revealed pretty soon. Don't know what it's going to be, but looking forward to it. Mammoth's a good start to the year.
It is pretty sweet. A little bit narrow, not a lot of elephant tokens hanging around in top tier Magic right now, but that is also likely to change somewhere down the line.
I can only hope.
I think so too.
Do you know something I don't know?
No, I don't. Just, it's a pretty popular animal, and I think it would behoove Wizards to bring it back at some point as a token.
An elephant resurgence, perhaps. Maybe even bring back Call of the Herd itself.
Yeah, because Beast, you know, that's so broad. It's really hard to feel connected to Beast as a card, but elephants, mammoths, centaurs, I think that's just better space.
Pretty anti-centaur. Not a fan.
Well, it's not going to be for everyone. I like the specific names and not things that are as broad as, say, Beast.
Shouldn't just a centaur just have trample? Am I wrong about that?
I could see it going either way.
One of the two should have trample. Either a centaur token should have trample or an elephant token should have trample.
I think Wizards is generally served not having keywords on tokens that modify combat because often people are playing with just face down cards. Flying is pretty easy because someone tries to go with to block with a flyer and you just say you can't do that. So you can always back it up.
Okay.
But keywords like trample and first strike I think are pretty bad to have on tokens that appear common.
All right, you know what? That makes sense. Game designer Patrick in the house.
I'm not saying that's definitely a rule that they have. I think they're just better served not having those keywords appear on tokens because people are often not playing with the token.
I can see that. I can see that.
Now, it's different when you're talking about rares and mythics, but at lower rarities, things are going to be doing all the time. Just keep them simple.
I say we just bring back Call of the Herd. Who's that hurting?
Probably no one.
Yeah. Bring back that old staple. I love that card. Both players are going to take a look at their opening hands here. Housman will be on the play as he only got to play 2 turns in the first game. You see he's got a Force Will, a couple of copies of Pounder, Gataxian Probe, and a Brainstorm over there. So a very blue-heavy hand, and there's a black card hiding out back there, too, in Surgical Extraction. Seems pretty tough to pass this one up.
Well, I think that may be Cabal Therapy, not positive in Surgical Extraction. On Joe's side, he has 2 copies of Firestorm in his main deck, and he's kept those in. Firestorm seems excellent against Delver decks.
It is a Cabal Therapy. You are correct. Deck is labeled as Blue-Red Delver, but sometimes there are just a couple black cards hanging out. Of course, Cabal Therapy, really, really powerful in combination with Young Pyromancer.
Absolutely.
Here's a Gataxian Probe. That's where Housman wants to start. He wants to see exactly what the set's working with.
So this is a slight misstep here from Housman that may come back to harm him. Since he has a Therapy in hand, I would have preferred to not play the Volcanic Island first. Just lead with the Gataxian Probe. And if you happen to draw the Underground Sea or one of your fetch lands, maybe you would rather Therapy this turn than play a cantrip, depending on exactly what's going on in Joe's hand.
And given the texture of Joe's hand, where he's got multiple copies of 2 cards in Careful Study and Force of Will, had Myles drawn a fetch land there, he would have loved a Cabal Therapy.
Oh, absolutely. Joe probably has to force it.
Myles going to resolve a Ponder here. He's going to take Force of Will with him and pass the turn back over to Lossett. Lossett will draw. His copy of Animate dead. He will play Polluted Delta and simply pass the turn back. Delver Secret's a draw here for Housman. Will it be another Brainstorm-esque effect? It'll just be the creature he wants to get the clock on the table.
Yeah, at this point, he set up the top of his deck. He knows that there is a spell coming in Lightning Bolt. And he needs to get a clock going to have some pressure to back up these 2 Force of Wills.
1 second to sacrifice this Polluted Delta. He's going to go down to 19. We'll see what land Joe does want to search up. One of the nice things when you're playing against Blue-Red Delver, typically you can aggressively search out non-basic lands so you don't have to worry about wastelands. So Joe's going to do just that to get himself an Underground Sea.
I mean, Joe's mana base does not care one bit about Wasteland here. He's got Badlands, Volcanic Island, Gemstone Caverns, Underground Seas, and Fetch Lands.
Very nice.
He's anticipating not playing against very many Wastelands.
Careful Study time. 2 cards coming. 2 will have to go into the graveyard. See if Lossett has found a big creature to put down there.
Here's at least Gristlebrand in the hand.
Such a radical take here for Joe. Again, playing this deck at the Players' Championship, but he's got 15 rounds of Magic to play with it this weekend. It was a big gamble at the Players' Championship to play this strategy. No one really saw it coming besides Kent, who he did work on the deck with.
But I mean, if you anticipate at the Players' Championship, people are going to be metagaming that way and being really loud on graveyard hate, it really magnifies the value of the decision.
Firestorm and Gristlebrand go to the graveyard from careful study. Lossett does have another land to play in Badlands, so he will deploy that, and he'll follow it up with a copy of Reanimated, targeting Gristlebrand. Let's have a fight. Myles going to use a Forcible, remove a copy of Ponder. Cannot let this resolve. Now we know Joe has 2 copies of Forcible in his hand, so he's going to have a fight over this too.
But you're happy that it wasn't Daze there or something else. You know, if you're bleeding Myles out of these kind of resources, it's unlikely he's going to be able to fight over all of your reanimation over the course of the game.
Forcible removing a Brainstorm there for Myles. Means he doesn't have much of a hand. He wins the fight here. But you see Lossett's hand. He's got an Animate dead at the ready for next turn. So for Housman, as he reveals a Lightning Bolt to Delver Secret, slips it in an Insectile Aberration, he better find something that's helpful. And you can see his hand, 2 Cabal Therapies and Lightning Bolt. Those don't help.
Yeah, he did. You know, he had obviously to Force Will that, but now the rest of his hand is quite bad as a result.
And with Joe drawing a blue card there and Brainstorm, he's more than happy to go for this because he has Forcible in his hand with that Brainstorm. Gristlebrand gonna come on in. And Joe's just going to comfortably pass the turn back. The thing about Gristlebrand in this particular matchup, you don't really have to even activate it.
No, I mean, a 6/7 lifelink right here is more than enough to overpower Blue-Red Delver.
Joe gonna come into the red zone with the big fella. Housman going to block with a Delver of Secrets that is flipped to an Insectile Aberration and then Lightning Bolted, so Lossett does not gain any life. A creative play, but I'm not sure if it's a game-winning one.
No. And Joe's now thinking about this because he's in the spot of, does this even matter?
Yeah.
Do I have to bother with this?
Does have a copy of Daze in hand where he can hard cast it, he can alternate cast it, or he can just say, you know what, that's fine, you can do that creative thing, but I don't really care. I'm at 15.
Yeah, it's really funny. Joe's taking there forever because it's so low opportunity cost for him to fight over that, but he also just doesn't feel like it matters.
Yeah.
He has to figure it out.
And it certainly does not. Housman's draw was a Spell Pierce, and that is going to do it. Joe Lossett is going to win this match here over Myles Housman. 2-0. Reanimator will take care of Blue-Red Delver. For Joe, again, if he was playing Miracles here, we're talking about maybe a different outcome, or at least a lot longer match there, but he's playing Reanimator. He knows his matchup is good against Blue-Red Delver, and that's part of the reason he's made his decision for this tournament.
Exactly. Myles there kept a pretty speculative hand in game 2. There's a lot that could go wrong, either missing Black Mana for Cabal Therapy or not finding a piece of pressure early enough. As it turns out, both things happened, and even though he was able to find 2 copies of Force of Will, Joe's Reanimator deck is able to push through that. I think a lot of people who are newer to Legacy assume, yeah, Force of Will, how are these combo decks ever going to beat it? And with their own Force of Wills, with discard spells, with just the speed of the format, these combo decks are able to overpower that level of disruption. You need a